Things that make you go,
You know, these aren't jokes, these are thoughts, these are things that make you say.
This year, 350,000 Americans will die from cancer.
The toxic ingredients that the FDA approves to be completely healthy in your food.
1 out of 4 of us will develop cancer in our lifetime. That's over 50 million people in the United States alone.
Do we really know what's in our food? Lasagna with horse meat, artificial steaks.
The purpose of this presentation is to show that this great human tragedy can be stopped now, entirely on the basis of existing scientific knowledge. We'll explore the theory that cancer, like scurvy or pellagra, is a deficiency disease, aggravated by the lack of an essential food compound in modern man's diet.
Falsely advertised olive oil, tuna with nitrates. The list of counterfeit food products is endless. Everything can be faked, from the most basic products to expensive ingredients.
And that its ultimate control is to be found simply in restoring this substance to our daily intake.
Some of these common chemicals found in our daily foods are trans fats, refined grains, refined vegetable oil, monosodium glutamate, and the list goes on and on.
It's a trade of tens of billions of euros that runs quietly across our borders. To dive into food fraud is to embark on a journey into an unknown land.
We are not in the business of promoting vitamins, food supplements, or products of any kind. We are not prescribing any course of treatment. We endorse nothing except freedom of choice.
Trans fats are hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated fats that solidify at room temperature. These unsaturated fats are found to cause heart disease and increase bad cholesterol. These are found highly in vegetable shortening, which is a cheap substitute of butter, and baked products made from it in popcorns and almost every fried fast food we can't resist ourselves from eating.
We have nothing to sell but facts. What you're about to hear does not carry the approval of organized medicine. The Food and Drug Administration, the American Cancer Society, and the American Medical Association have labeled it fraud and quackery.
Whistleblowers and factory workers, kept in the dark, will reveal hidden truths. Courageous journalists and persistent prosecutors will help us understand what goes on behind the scenes. The fight is on against this serious crime that involves everyone from criminals to mafia leaders. The outcome is uncertain, as these traffickers operate within a gigantic market through which all our food transits.
The artificial sweeteners, which are added to give taste of sugar but are completely zero-calorie ingredient with higher risk of affecting blood sugar levels and a cause of cancer too. They are used in weight loss diets due to their low calorie content, but the truth is they are way worse than normal sugar we eat. It causes the brain restricted release of satiety hormone, and as a consequence the person overeats, gaining more calories.
The average physician, however, is less dogmatic. He's more apt to say, let's give it a try and then pass judgment. Consequently, an increasing number of doctors all over the world now are testing and proving in their own clinics that the vitamin concept of cancer is true. With billions of dollars spent each year on research, with other billions taken in from the cancer-related sale of drugs, and with vote-hungry politicians promising ever-increasing government programs, we find that today there are more people making a living from cancer than are dying from it.
How did they manage to gain control over our food? Long-hidden, scandalous practices are going to be revealed. An unprecedented investigation into the world of food fraud.
If the riddle were to be solved by a simple vitamin, this gigantic commercial and political industry could be wiped out overnight.
Food products are recalled from supermarket shelves on a regular basis. Most of the time, we don't even notice it. Yet it makes us doubt our food, to which we devote a large part of our lives, and which is as essential as the air we breathe.
The result is that the science of cancer therapy isn't nearly as complicated as the politics of cancer therapy. In the past, the FDA and other agencies of government have used every means at their disposal to prevent this story from being told.
Sometimes the contents can be misleading.
They've arrested citizens for holding public meetings to tell others of their convictions on this subject. They've confiscated films and books. They even now are prosecuting doctors who apply these theories in an effort to save the lives of their own patients. With this background in mind, it may appear to be the height of folly to proceed with this presentation.
It is late 2012 in Ireland. The Director of Food Supervision notices that the price of beef has dropped. He orders DNA sampling of meat from 27 commercially sold burgers.
We found one product with about 1/3 horse DNA in it, and which was just an incredible finding. We went back and checked, we double-checked, and we triple-checked, because we understood that if we were to go out public with such a story, it was going to have, quite an effect.
But ladies and gentlemen, if the story that follows is true, as we firmly are convinced it is, then in the name of humanity, someone simply has to stand up against the bureaucracy. And we are determined to do it.
It started out as hamburger, then lasagna, then moussaka and ravioli. Prevention tests in the spring of 2013 revealed horse meat in products where it was not expected.
One should switch to healthier monosaturated fats like peanut, olive, or canola oil. Next are the artificial sweeteners, which are added to give taste of sugar but are completely zero-calorie ingredient with higher risk of affecting blood sugar levels and a cause of cancer too.
At the time we thought it was an Irish problem. It turned out to be a global problem. And products have been withdrawn from shelves in places like Singapore, Hong Kong, in some of the Caribbean countries. So really we are looking at what really has developed into a massive problem.
The history of science is the history of struggle against entrenched error. Many of the world's greatest discoveries initially were rejected by the scientific community, and those who pioneered those discoveries often were ridiculed and condemned as quacks and charlatans. Columbus was bitterly attacked for believing the earth was round. Bruno was burned at the stake for claiming the earth was not the center of the universe.
It was a fraud in the world of minced meat products, the most common meat product, especially in ready-made meals. This scandal could have gone unnoticed, like many others. But the Irish authorities have made this public, and their revelations have raised an unprecedented wave of outrage.
Artificial colors added to make food catchy and mouth-watering in appearance are involved in causing serious health problems affecting thyroid, bladder, or brain cells. These include yellow number 6, causing kidney tumors found in beverages and baked products. Yellow number 5, this is also a carcinogenic agent found in dessert and candies. Green, blue number 1 and 2, red number 2, 3, and 40, all of these are found to be carcinogenic and cause hyperactivity in children.
Galileo was imprisoned for teaching that the earth moved around the sun. Even the Wright brothers were ridiculed and condemned for claiming that a machine could fly above the earth. In the field of medicine, Andreas Vesalius was denounced as an impostor and heretic because of his discoveries in the field of human anatomy. William Harvey was disgraced as a physician for believing that blood was pumped by the heart and actually moved around the body through arteries. And Ignaz Semmelweis was fired from his hospital post for requiring his maternity staff to wash their hands.
Ingrid Kragel started her career as an investigator on this case. She is a member of Foodwatch, a European organisation that protects consumers.
L'Irlande, elle a balancé toutes les infos. Elle balance tout. Elle balance les noms des marques. Elle balance les lieux des points de vente. Elle demande aussi à l'industrie de faire des tests, toute l'industrie de la viande, des milliers de tests. Et étonnamment, elle met tous les tests en ligne. Toutes les informations sont disponibles et ça, c'était quand même exceptionnel.
This ingredient replacement involved 4.5 million ready-to-eat meals, distributed by the biggest brands throughout Europe. Who was able to set up such an operation? A large-scale investigation was launched. A number of clues led to the Netherlands and mobilized the Dutch fraud police.
Where is the source of this? That was the big question. Who put the horse meat inside the beef products?
Karen Gusau is the head of a department that has the same investigative power as a narcotics squad. 17 detectives and financial analysts are in charge of tracking down fraudsters.
White or enriched flour. This is used in various bakery products and is widely edible in different forms. However, it is just the leftover after removal of germ and bran both and have zero nutritional value and no fiber. It gets into the blood and affects the blood sugar level, and it will have a glycemic profile as well. It is also involved in gaining additional unhealthy weight, high blood pressure, bad cholesterol, or fatty liver.
Centuries ago, it wasn't unusual for entire naval expeditions to be wiped out by scurvy. Between 1600 and 1800, the casualty list of the British Navy alone was over 1 million sailors. Medical experts at the time were baffled as they searched in vain for some kind of a strange bacterium, virus, or toxin that supposedly lurked in the dark holes of ships. And yet, for hundreds of years, the cure was already known and written in the record. In the winter of 1535, when the French explorer Jacques Cartier found his ships frozen in the ice off the St. Lawrence River, scurvy began to take its deadly toll. Out of a crew of 110, 25 already had died, and most of the others were so ill they weren't expected to recover. And then a friendly Indian showed them the simple remedy. Tree bark and needles from the white pine, both rich in ascorbic acid or vitamin C, were stirred into a drink which produced immediate improvement and swift recovery.
It is crucial to read the ingredients list before you consume any mouth-watering or eye-catching food products, and better nip it in the bud early. MSG or monosaturated glutamate is used in processed food as a flavor enhancer in different soups, sauces, seafood, and meat products, which are usually high in glutamate content. MSG is known to cause after-dinner headaches and allergic reactions. It is found to increase weight and cause obesity.
Upon returning to Europe, Cartier reported this incident to the medical authorities, but they were amused by such witch doctor cures of ignorant savages, and they did nothing to follow it up. Yes, the cure for scurvy was known, but because of scientific arrogance, it took over 200 years and cost hundreds of thousands of lives before the medical experts began to accept and apply this knowledge. Finally, in 1747, John Lind, a young surgeon's mate in the British Navy, discovered that oranges and lemons produced relief from scurvy, and recommended that the Royal Navy include citrus fruits in the stores of all its ships. And yet, it still took 48 more years before his recommendation was put into effect. The 20th century has proven to be no exception to this pattern. Only a generation ago, large portions of the American Southeast were decimated by the dread disease of pellagra, which was thought to be contagious and probably caused by an as yet undiscovered virus.
The main thing that we do when we carry out criminal investigations is to reconstruct the money flow and the flow of goods and connect these together.
The Dutch police investigated the obscure networks of minced meat. They first identified the manufacturers who make beef recipes. Behind these manufacturers, they found several wholesalers. These wholesalers worked with traders, market specialists who buy and sell online in quantities of hundreds of thousands of tons.
La filière était très opaque parce qu'il y avait derrière des traders. Et il est très difficile pour les autorités de mettre la main sur des traders qui n'ont parfois pas de siège en Europe. D'ailleurs, les responsables de l'époque parlent d'une véritable plongée dans la comptabilité. Ça a été très très complexe pour eux.
The police identified a Dutch meat trader, Jan Vassen.
One should instead consume whole grain in order to stay healthy and strong. These were only a few examples which prove why one should avoid eating chemically processed and junk foods. Sadly, there is a huge list of such chemicals that reaches our digestive tract and affect different organs slowly but badly. Thus, the more natural the food is, the better it is.
As far back as 1914, Dr. Joseph Goldberger had proven that this condition was related to diet, and later showed that it could be prevented simply by eating liver or yeast. But it wasn't until the 1940s, almost 30 years later, that the medical world fully accepted pellagra as a vitamin B deficiency. By 1952, Dr. Ernst T. Krebs Jr., a biochemist in San Francisco, had advanced the theory that cancer, like scurvy or pellagra, is not caused by some kind of mysterious bacterium, virus, or toxin, but is merely a deficiency disease aggravated by the lack of an essential food compound in modern man's diet.
The head of a huge network. His company was registered in Cyprus and imported horse meat from Canada and Romania. This meat was then sold to his associate wholesalers. The two main ones were located in Belgium and France. It was at these companies that the fraud took place. The horse meat was transformed into beef by the magic of a label. The wholesalers sent the fake minced meat to Luxembourg to a manufacturer of ready-made meals. These fake products were distributed to hundreds of supermarkets.
He identified this compound as part of the nitrilicide family, which occurs abundantly in nature in over 1,200 edible plants, and found virtually...
Il y avait la responsabilité de ceux qui l'achetaient à des prix ridicules, de ceux qui l'utilisaient, mais personne, en tout cas c'est ce qu'ils prétendent, n'a vérifié l'ADN de la viande. Et donc dans des quantités phénoménales comme ça, avec autant d'opérateurs économiques, c'est quand même étonnant.
It's particularly prevalent in the seeds of fruits, but also is contained in grasses, maize, sorghum, millet, cassava, linseed, bitter almonds, and many other foods that generally have been deleted from the menus of modern civilization.
This collective misconduct has angered a man who is at the heart of this industry. Christophe Brousset had been working for 20 years as a trader in major food processing groups.
Tout ce que j'entendais, c'était soit des industriels ou leurs représentants qui disaient mais non, c'est un cas isolé, chez nous on a la meilleure industrie alimentaire du monde, c'est fini, c'était avant, maintenant c'est clean. Mais je connaissais évidemment les pratiques du milieu. Et c'est à ce moment-là que je me suis dit bon, ce serait quand même pas mal que quelqu'un en parle. Et là j'ai commencé à parler, oui. Parce que j'attendais que quelqu'un d'autre le fasse et personne ne le faisait.
Christophe Brousset has decided to break the silence as he himself has committed fraud.
Oui, j'ai dû acheter des produits que normalement j'aurais pas achetés. Oui. Parce qu'on me le demandait, parce que déjà j'avais pas le choix. Donc, quand on est employé en général, on fait ce qu'on son patron demande. Donc moi on me demandait d'acheter des produits qui étaient de mauvaise qualité, donc j'étais contraint de le faire. Il y avait une fraude généralisée, oui. Sur un produit, sur plusieurs produits, oui. Sur le miel, sur le poivre, sur le cumin, sur le paprika, sur plein de produits.
A chronic disease is one which usually doesn't pass away of its own accord. A metabolic disease is one which arises within the body and isn't transmittable to another person. Cancer, therefore, is defined as a chronic metabolic disease. Dr. Krebs has pointed out that in the entire history of medical science, there hasn't been one chronic metabolic disease that was ever cured and prevented by drugs or mechanical manipulation of the body.
In 2013, a whistleblower exposed widespread fraudulent practices in the food processing industry.
Il faut bien comprendre que c'est pas un acheteur tout seul qui décide de frauder, par exemple. C'est un environnement. À la fois sa structure à lui, qui décide de frauder, à la fois ses fournisseurs, qui lui proposent des produits pour frauder, et à la fois des clients qui acceptent de recevoir des produits à des prix qui ne sont pas normaux.
Christophe Brousset's findings did not provoke the sort of reaction he was expecting among the manufacturers. However, his outrage, and that of millions of European citizens, has forced the European authorities to act.
J'ai fermé les yeux, donc j'étais dans un environnement qui me permettait pas réellement de prendre du recul.
In every case, the ultimate solution was found only in factors relating to adequate nutrition. And he thinks that this is an important clue as to where to concentrate our scientific curiosity in the search for a better understanding of cancer. But there are other clues as well. Before looking at the more technical aspects of Dr. Krebs' theory, it's well that we examine some of them. For example, domesticated pets often seek out certain grasses to eat, even though they're adequately filled by other foods. This is particularly likely to happen if the animals are not well. It's interesting to note that the grasses selected by instinct are Johnson grass, Tunis grass, Sudan grass, and others that are especially rich in nitrillicides, or vitamin B17.
It is here in Brussels that the major rules concerning food are written up. It is then up to the individual states to implement them. For Eric Marin, an official at the European Commission, the horse meat scandal, known as Horsegate, was a turning point.
L'emballement médiatique a fait que c'est devenu une crise et qu'il a fallu gérer cette crise.
Eric Marin was proud of the European health surveillance system. He discovered that Europe is not well equipped to deal with this new problem that is affecting our food.
Monkeys and other primates at the zoo, when given a fresh peach or apricot, will carefully pull away the sweet fleshy part, crack open the hard pit, and devour the small seed that remains. Instinct compels them to do this, even though they've never seen that kind of fruit before. These seeds are one of the most concentrated sources of nitrillicides to be found anywhere in nature.
Ici, on s'est dit, mais tout le système qu'on a bâti pendant des années, parce qu'on a construit la chaîne alimentaire est une des plus sûres au monde en Europe. On a bâti tout un système qui était lié comment détecter les problèmes de santé publique. Et là, quelque part, on se retrouvait complètement désarmé face à quelque chose qui est moins contrôlé dans les entreprises. Et il y a une prise de conscience générale qu'il fallait faire quelque chose, non plus simplement pour détecter les problèmes de santé publique, mais détecter les suspicions de fraude. Bonjour tout le monde.
The Food Fraud Network was created for this. European officials struggle all year long to detect and track down counterfeit food products. All accidental modifications are dismissed. Only cases of intentional manipulation are investigated.
Wild bears are great consumers of nitrillicides in their natural diet. Not only do they seek out berries that are rich in this substance, but when they kill small grazing animals for their own food, instinctively they pass over the muscle portions and consume first the viscera and rumen, which are filled with nitrillicide grasses. In captivity, animals seldom are allowed to eat all the foods of their instinctive choice. In the San Diego Zoo, for example, the routine diet for bears, although adequate in volume and nutritious in many other respects, is almost totally devoid of nitrillicides. In one grotto alone, over a 6-year period, 5 bears died of cancer. It was generally speculated by the experts that a virus had been the cause.
In an African swine fever area.
Ok, très clair, Carla. Bon, ça c'est vraiment de la fraude, hein, donc on les met dans notre rapport semanal pour les États membres. On est passé ici à la création d'un réseau européen avec des points de contact dans chaque État membre où on pouvait échanger des informations confidentielles, sensibles, en toute confiance, pour pouvoir agir et coopérer entre les États membres. Et ça, c'était déjà une première révolution.
For this to happen, the 27 European states must be flawlessly compliant. This is not always the case, as demonstrated by a recent case involving beef.
Now, it's highly significant that one never finds cancer in the carcasses of wild animals killed in the hunt. These creatures contract the disease only when they are domesticated by man and forced to eat the foods that he provides and the scraps from his table.
It happened in 2019, 6 years after Horsegate. The scandal was serious, and France was at the heart of it. This time, the fraud concerned a public order for 1,500 tons of minced steaks, intended to distribute to charities, These charities raised the alarm when they discovered the whitish colour of these steaks originating from Poland. Why did the French government choose Polish suppliers?
Dr. George M. Briggs, professor of nutrition at the University of California, has said, "The typical American diet is a national disaster. If I fed it to pigs or cows without adding vitamins and other supplements, I could wipe out the livestock industry." A brief look at the American diet tells the story. Grocery shelves now are lined with high carbohydrate foods that have been processed, refined, synthesized, artificially flavored, and loaded with chemical preservatives. Some manufacturers even boast of how little real food there is in their product. Millet once was the nation's staple grain. It is high in nitrosamine content, but now it's been replaced by wheat, which has practically none at all. Sorghum cane has been replaced by sugar cane with the same result.
Pour moi, c'est assez difficile à comprendre parce qu'on est un des pays avec la plus belle industrie agricole, avec probablement les meilleurs produits au monde. Donc on aille acheter du steak à l'autre bout de l'Europe, dans des pays où on sait très bien, enfin la réputation de la Pologne en termes de qualité alimentaire est exécrable, extrêmement mauvaise.
Even our cattle are fed increasingly on quick-growing, low-nitrosamine grasses, so there's less vitamin B17 residue in the meat we eat.
European buyers have become fixated on Polish beef. Suppliers are undercutting prices, partially due to highly competitive labour costs. Poland has become one of the world's leading meat producers. A business that in 2017 was worth almost 6 billion euros.
C'est devenu un acteur économique sur le secteur de la viande absolument incontournable. Tout le monde se fournit là-bas. On a vu cette explosion en fait du marché, du commerce. Il y a eu énormément d'investissements. Le véritable problème, c'est que les contrôles n'ont pas suivi.
In some places, livestock now are being fed a diet containing 15% paper to fatten them quicker for market.
The charities had the Polish steaks delivered to them, analysed. The results confirmed all their suspicions.
Est-ce que les analyses ont été faites sur les produits?
Alors on trouve du tissu osseux, on trouve du tissu conjonctif, des glandes, des muqueuses, des tissus lymphoïdes. Donc en fait voilà, ça a été remplacé par tous les sous-produits possibles et tous les déchets d'abattoir qu'on peut trouver. Voilà. C'est assez peu ragoûtant. Donc voilà. Donc, en termes de protéines, non seulement on n'est pas suffisamment haut, mais en plus, pour faire monter le taux de protéines, on a mis des protéines végétales. Donc, il y a quasiment, oui, il y a très peu de viande en fait dans ce produit.
And so we see that in the past 50 years, the foods that once provided the American people with ample amounts of natural vitamin B17 gradually have been pushed aside or replaced altogether by foods almost devoid of this factor. Significantly, it's during this same time span that the cancer rate has moved steadily upward, to the point where today, 1 out of every 4 persons in the United States is destined to contract this disease. The ultimate scientific test of the vitamin theory of cancer would be to take a large number of people, numbering in the thousands, and over a period of many years, expose them to a consistent diet of rich nitrosamine foods, and then check the results. Fortunately, this already has been done. In the remote recesses of the Himalaya Mountains, between West Pakistan, India, and China, there is a tiny kingdom called Hunza. These people are known world over for their amazing longevity and good health. It's not uncommon for Hunzakas to live beyond 100 years, and some even to 120 or more. Visiting medical teams from the outside world report that there never has been a case of cancer in Hunza.
Beef has been replaced with byproducts. The substitution is all the more shocking since the steaks were intended for people in need. But how do you find out who is responsible? The European Food Fraud Network has no investigative power.
Il est très clair que la Commission n'a aucun pouvoir de police. Ça relève vraiment des États membres et c'est eux qui font les enquêtes, ils échangent les informations et l'enquête est déclenchée dans le pays qui reçoit cette information.
Although presently accepted science is unable to explain why these people should be free of cancer, it's interesting to note that the average Hunza diet contains over 200 times more nitrilicide than the average American diet. In fact, in that land where there is no such thing as money, a man's wealth is measured by the number of apricot trees he owns. And the most prized of all foods is considered to be the apricot seed. It's also interesting to learn that when the Hunsakuts leave their secluded land and adopt the menus of other countries, they soon succumb to the same diseases and infirmities, including cancer, as the rest of mankind.
So it is the Polish government that has to take over. The Polish veterinary authorities are launching a series of controls aimed at the manufacturer, the company Biernacki. It is one of the new giants of beef production. It is subjected to the same regulatory obligations as in the rest of Europe.
Kiedy zostały wyprodukowane te kotlety, jest pobierana tak zwana kontrpróbka i zostawiana na miejscu w zakładzie. Wszelkie informacje, wszelkie wyniki tej kontroli zostały przekazane oczywiście przez system AAC stronie francuskiej. Natomiast mogę powiedzieć, że te kontrole, które zostały tam przeprowadzone, nie potwierdziły tego zafałszowania tych kotletów. Także na tym my tak naprawdę zakończyliśmy na tym sprawę.
The Eskimos are another people that have been observed by medical teams for many decades and found to be totally free of cancer. The traditional Eskimo diet is amazingly rich in nitrillicides that come from the residue in the meat of caribou and other grazing animals, and also from the salmonberry, which grows abundantly in the Arctic areas. When the Eskimo abandons his traditional way of life and begins to rely on westernized foods, he becomes even more cancer-prone than the average American.
In conclusion, there is nothing to investigate here. We tried to question the Polish company's managers, but we were rejected several times. Meanwhile, there is another case which 2 Polish journalists have been working on for the past 6 months. It will raise suspicions about the country's entire beef industry.
There are many other peoples in the world that could be cited with the same characteristics. The Abkhazians near the Black Sea, the Hopi and Navajo Indians of North America, certain native populations in South America and South Africa. From all races and all regions of the world, the one thing they have in common is that the degree to which these people are free from cancer is in direct proportion to the amount of nitrillicides or vitamin B17 found in their native diet.
One of them, Patrick Sapaniak, managed to get himself hired in a small countryside slaughterhouse.
We got a tip that there's some illegal procedure happening in one of the slaughterhouses. We knew before that there are similar procedure ongoing in other slaughterhouses, but this one, we knew exactly that this is going on.
In answer to this, the skeptic may argue that these primitive groups aren't exposed to the same cancer-producing elements that modern man is, and perhaps that's why they're immune. Let them breathe the same smog-filled air, smoke the same cigarettes, swallow the same chemicals added to their food or drinking water, use the same soaps or deodorants, and then see how they fare. This, of course, is a valid point.
Take a look without getting anyone's attention. So I changed some of my appearance, changed some of my behavior, and went for a job interview to the slaughterhouse. It might sound ridiculous, but I got the job.
But fortunately, even that question now has been resolved by experience. For over 2 decades, there has been a steadily growing group of people who have accepted the vitamin theory of cancer and who have altered their diets accordingly. They represent all walks of life, all ages, both sexes, and reside in almost every advanced nation in the world. It's estimated that there are many thousands in the United States alone. Now, it's true that there's no way to determine their exact number or to conduct clinical examinations on each of them, but they do constitute a rather well-defined group that is both vocal and conspicuous.
And then the next day, I started to work as a slaughterman. The first trucks of cows, sick or dead ones, were coming out. Like few of them have some rotting parts, few of them like they have some white thing going out from through their mouth. And there was no vet, of course, nearby. He just came up early in the morning to check out heads of cows, not the meat. He behaved like this bovine meat magically pop out in the middle of the night, and he just comes there and I don't see anything.
Broadcasted on television, their investigation triggered a political crisis.
It's significant, therefore, that after starting and maintaining a diet rich in vitamin B17, none of these people has ever been known to contract cancer. Now let's repeat that statement. While their fellow citizens are suffering from cancer at the rate of 1 out of every 4, not one of these thousands. For many persons, the logic of all these facts put together is so great that it would be easy to close the case right here. But in view of the powerful opposition against this concept, let's not content ourselves only with the logic of the theory. Let's reinforce our convictions with the science of the theory also, that we may understand why it works the way our logic tells us that it must.
The journalists showed that other slaughterhouses in the country have the same practices. They bought cows for meat processing at low prices and sold the meat at full price.
It got a big effect, and then our Ministry of Agriculture had to take some actions. They ordered massive checkups in every single slaughterhouse in Poland, which is like 400 of them.
In 1902, John Beard, a professor of embryology at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, reported that there were no discernible differences between highly malignant cancer cells and certain pre-embryonic cells that were quite normal in the early stages of pregnancy. In technical terms, these normal cells are called trophoblasts. Extensive research had led Professor Beard to the conclusion that cancer and trophoblast are in fact one and the same.
But the one who's being inspected knows about it like in a week in advance, so there is no surprise effect. I talked with several former ministers of agriculture and deputies, which told me that this scandal, like everybody knew about it, that is going on, but it was convenient to basically leave it on and work it because it's pure profit, right?
His theory, therefore, is known as the trophoblastic thesis of cancer. The trophoblast in pregnancy indeed does exhibit all the classical characteristics of cancer. It spreads and multiplies rapidly as it eats its way into the uterus wall, preparing a place where the embryo can attach itself for maternal protection and nourishment.
Meat not fit for consumption entered the food chain through a weak link, the slaughterhouses. Then it spread through the entire marketing network.
The meat from this slaughterhouse where I worked was founded in like 14 countries: France, Germany, Czech Republic, Saudi Arabia, Turkey.
The fraud caused a diplomatic crisis at the European level. Inspectors sent by Brussels then audited the entire Polish beef industry. Their report confirmed numerous shortcomings in sanitary procedures and traceability.
Ils fournissent toute l'Europe à des prix défiant toute concurrence et donc on a un souci. Cette viande potentiellement part sur les marchés sans qu'elle ait été correctement contrôlée.
The state didn't really change the law, so it's still happening somewhere over there, right?
How can one effectively fight against food fraud when the state doesn't even take action?
The trophoblast is formed as a result of a chain reaction, starting with another cell, identified as the diploid totipotent. For our purposes, let's call this simply the total life cell, because it contains within it all the separate characteristics of a complete organism, and has the total capacity to evolve into any organ or tissue, or for that matter, into the complete embryo itself.
Les administrations vont effectivement donner plus ou moins d'attention à la fraude alimentaire. Alors, est-ce qu'on peut parler de bons et de mauvais élèves? Vous savez, chaque administration fait avec son passif, avec son passé et avec ses moyens. Il faut en être conscient.
About 80% of these total lice cells are located in the ovaries or testes, where they serve as a genetic reservoir for future offspring. The rest of them are distributed elsewhere in the body, for a purpose not yet fully understood, but which may involve the regenerative or healing process of damaged tissue.
One country prides itself on being at the forefront of the fight against fraud: Italy. They are the first country in Europe to have put in place detection measures, yet it is overwhelmed by fraud. The challenge is in keeping with the success of Italian cuisine and the worldwide appeal of each of its products.
The hormone estrogen is well known for its ability to affect changes in living tissue. Although it's generally thought of as a female hormone, it's found in both sexes and performs many vital functions. Wherever the body is damaged, either by physical trauma, chemical action, or illness, estrogen...
Il parmigiano in generale, il prosciutto, l'aceto balsamico, l'olio extravergine, insomma i prodotti più importanti vengono sofisticati. Il danno è al mercato, il danno è all'immagine del prodotto italiano.
Always appears in great quantities, possibly serving as a stimulator or catalyst for body repair.
Ludovico Vicaro is one of the few Italian magistrates specialized in criminal cases involving food.
Ricordo quando ero un giovane sostituto, mi occupavo anche di queste cose e c'era uno che con il suo furgoncino vendeva in varie parti d'Italia sempre quest'olio sofisticato. Però lo faceva a livello, come dire, di un giro di affari molto limitato. Oggi è diventata una grande industria.
Food fraud affects all Italian products.
It's now known that the total lice cell is triggered into producing trophoblast when it comes into contact with estrogen. When this happens to those total lice cells that have evolved from the fertilized egg, the result is a placenta and umbilical cord, a means of nourishing the embryo. But when it occurs non-sexually as part of the general healing process, the result is cancer. When cancer begins to form, the body reacts by attempting to seal it off and surrounding it with cells that are similar to those in the location where it occurs. A bump or lump is the usual result. Under microscopic examination, most of these tumors are found to resemble a mixture or hybrid of both trophoblast and surrounding cells. A fact which has led many researchers to the premature conclusion that there are many different types of cancer.
Biggest family dynasties in America, except you've never heard of their name. This family dynasty made more money last year than Coca-Cola, Nestle, and Chevron combined. In fact, they're the largest private company in the US.
How can the Italian authorities stop it? A special unit has been created to save the national gastronomic heritage. Its efforts are focused on one food product in particular. 9 out of 10 Italians consume it, and the demand is growing rapidly. Italian extra virgin olive oil is number 1 on the world market. This gem brings in 1.2 billion euros each year for the Italian state.
But the degree to which various tumors appear to be different is the same degree to which they're benign, which means that it's the degree to which there are non-cancerous cells within it. The greater the malignancy, the more these tumors begin to resemble each other, and the more clearly they begin to take on the classic characteristics of pregnancy trophoblast. And the most malignant of all cancers, the chorion epitheliomas, are almost indistinguishable from trophoblast cells. Or as Dr. Beard pointed out over 70 years ago, they're one and the same. Let's turn now to the question of defense mechanisms. Before we can hope to conquer cancer, first we must understand how nature conquers cancer, how nature protects the body and controls the growth of trophoblast cells.
Fare la segnalazione a eBay tramite Nero. Il prodotto non è in Italia. È all'estero.
È ceduto all'estero.
È un'inserzione che abbiamo su ebay.de, quindi
Counterfeiters borrow the names of real companies to market their fake products. Italian controllers have the means to demand that online sales platforms immediately take down fraudulent ads.
Nel sistema di controlli che è stato implementato, un sistema di controlli che è abbastanza stringente, anzi possiamo dire molto più stringente rispetto a altri paesi, anche perché l'olio extravergine oliva è un prodotto su cui tanto punta il Ministero dell'Agricoltura, la produzione nazionale.
All animals contain billions of white blood cells. One of the functions of these cells is to attack and destroy anything that is foreign and harmful to our bodies. For this reason, it would seem logical that they would attack cancer cells also. But since cancer is trophoblast, and since trophoblast is not foreign to the body, but is in fact a vital part of the life cycle, nature has provided it with a very effective means of avoiding the white cells.
To assess the effectiveness of this system, we must dive into the industry, starting with the olive trees. Italy is a land of traditional production, and one region is more so than any other, Tuscany. In the village where Leonardo da Vinci was born, Luigi carries on the tradition of Italian extra virgin olive oil. He is experiencing a dramatic drop in profits.
Quest'anno a luglio non avevo più olio, perché io quando ho finito il mio olio biologico non lo vendo più.
One of the characteristics of the trophoblast is that it's surrounded by a thin protein coating that carries a negative electrostatic charge. The white cells also have a negative charge, and since similar polarities repel each other, the trophoblast is well protected. Part of the solution to this problem is found in the pancreas, which secretes an enzyme called trypsin. When this enzyme reaches the trophoblast in sufficient quantity, it digests the protective protein coat. The cancer then is exposed to the attack of the white cells, and it dies.
Quando non ce n'ho più, non lo vendo più, l'ho finito, ce n'è più.
Global warming and the abundance of insects are putting a strain on national production, and yet Luigi notes that big brands supply the supermarkets of Italy and Europe all year long with extra virgin olive oil sold at knockdown prices.
E succede questo, che sono delle aziende, degli orefici abbastanza grossi, tipo nome non ne posso fare, va bene? Che importano olive con queste catene di supermercati che vendono l'olio 5 litri a 16 euro, è una vergogna. Quest'olio di merda, posso dire merda? Hai capito?
In order to supply the world market, these big manufacturers don't harvest, press or produce on site, unlike Luigi.
Applying this to the embryo, we find that the trophoblast cells there continue to grow and spread right up to the 8th week. And then suddenly, with no apparent reason, they stop growing and are destroyed. Recent research has provided the explanation. It's in the 8th week that the baby's pancreas begins to function.
They gather, produce and add fragrance, and their oil is then the result of complex blending, which includes a large portion of imported oil. This is how the fraud begins.
Now it's significant that the upper intestines, near the point where the pancreas empties into it, is the one place in the human body where cancer is almost never found. We note also that diabetics, those who suffer from a pancreas malfunction, are 3 times more likely to contract cancer than non-diabetics. These facts, which have puzzled medical investigators for years, at last can be explained in light of the trophoblastic thesis of cancer.
The port of Livorno is the main unloading point for goods in Tuscany. A special system set up by the Italian fraud control authorities is in place here. Every day, a ship unloads its cargo of extra virgin olive oil. Manufacturers bring in the precious liquid from all over the Mediterranean basin.
But what happens if the pancreas is weak, or if the rate of cancer growth is so high that the enzyme trypsin can't keep up with it? Then what? The answer is that nature has provided a backup mechanism, a second line of defense that can do the job even if the first line should fail. It involves a unique chemical compound that poisons the malignant cell while nourishing all the rest.
Facciamo uno screening su alcuni fornitori dalla Spagna e vediamo poi il risultato.
These imports will be mixed with the national production and sold as Italian extra virgin olive oil. This is legal under one condition, that all the criteria for extra virgin olive oil be met.
Interessante per noi, perché è olio che ha già un po' di anni.
Italian inspectors are looking for imported foreign oil of poor quality, too acidic or not fruity enough.
And this is where the vitamin concept of cancer finally comes back into the picture. The chemical compound in question, of course, is vitamin B17, which is found in those natural foods containing nitrosides. It's known also as amygdalin, and as such has been used and studied extensively for well over 100 years. But in its concentrated and purified form, developed by Dr. Krebs specifically for cancer therapy, it is known as Laetrile. For the sake of clarity in this presentation, however, we shall favor the more simple name, vitamin B17.
Imitation is easy, and if it is discovered, the oil is simply registered in a lower category, stating that an error has crept into the documents.
Spesso, abbiamo visto, il declassamento avviene mentre ancora stiamo facendo il campione. Quindi cosa vuol dire? L'azienda era consapevole che il prodotto non era tanto buono, però ci provo, vediamo, no? Se non ci sono controlli. Ci sono i controlli, allora io declasso il prodotto, non è più extravergine, prima ancora che sia analizzato.
Random checks at the port are of very little effectiveness. This is why the fraud control agents have concentrated their efforts on another stage of the production chain.
Deep in the heart of Wayzata, Minnesota, lies one of the biggest family dynasties in America, except you've never heard of their name. This family dynasty made more money last year than Coca-Cola, Nestle, and Chevron combined. In fact, they're the largest private company in the US, and this single company controls a massive share of your food supply. They're responsible for supplying food for some of the biggest brands out there, like McDonald's, Burger King, Kellogg's, Mars, Dunkin' Donuts, Unilever, Safeway, Kroger, Albertsons, Audi, Tesco, and many, many more.
The B17 molecule contains 2 units of sugar, 1 of benzaldehyde, and 1 of cyanide, all tightly locked together within it.
A few kilometers away, a producer agreed to let us watch how this European unique surveillance system works.
Permesso. Siamo venuti per un controllo.
A computer program allows the controllers to follow in real time all the producers of extra virgin olive oil. Each delivery must be declared.
Secret mega corporation, from coca powder to cooking oil, salt, sugar, eggs, meat, but you won't find their name on any of these labels. Most of you have never even heard of this name before. That's because this American dynasty has worked very hard to keep it that way. They don't want you to know what they're doing behind their factory doors, because if you ever found out, you would never buy their food products again.
As everyone knows, cyanide can be highly toxic and even fatal if taken in sufficient quantity. However, locked as it is in this natural state, it's completely inert chemically and has absolutely no effect on living tissue.
Veramente 2 olio di questa stagione.
Quindi non è presente sul nostro registro, perché abbiamo visto non ci sono movimentazioni, a meno che non sia entrata qualche altra.
È arrivato stamattina questo.
Perfetto.
Per 83 quintali.
Before launching an investigation, the inspector knows exactly what he needs to find in the tanks. The quantity, the oil that is produced on site, the oil that is imported. Everything must be recorded by the producer. This meticulous control is equivalent to putting the entire production of Italian olive oil under administrative supervision.
Servono 5 lattine per poter fare cosa, cerchiamo di prenderle più random possibile. Okay.
While everything seems to be in order with this producer, random samples will be taken and sent for analysis. This is the only way to ensure the authenticity of the extra virgin olive oil.
Però è una garanzia per noi che lavoriamo e che vogliamo produrre un olio italiano di qualità. Ecco, quindi ben vengano, anzi, vengono ancora più controlli più stretti, più stringenti, più forti.
Cargill. Eating processed food from companies like Cargill is a surefire way to shorten your life.
There is only one substance that can unlock this molecule and release the cyanide. That substance is an enzyme called beta-glucosidase, which we shall call the unlocking enzyme. When B17 comes in contact with this enzyme, not only is the cyanide released, but also the benzaldehyde, which is highly toxic by itself. In fact, these two working together are at least 100 times more poisonous than either of them separately.
Is there a double standard between small manufacturers and large ones? It is rumoured among producers that the Italian authorities tend to spare the major producers of the market. All the while, the quality of their oil is regularly called into question by independent bodies. In May 2021, the consumer protection magazine Salvagente tested 15 bottles of oil from major brands. They were sent to public laboratories for analysis. The result was that 7 out of 15 bottles were not extra virgin.
Cargill may have started out as a single shack on the side of the road, but today they're a whole lot bigger. Cargill is the largest private company in the US, and if they were public, they would be ranked number 15 on the Fortune 500 list, just in front of AT&T. And Cargill has its fingers in almost every pie imaginable, from grains to livestock to palm oil and coca, to metals, animal feed, energy, and even hedge funds. Their total revenue in 2021 was $135 billion, which is almost double the amount of what other big agricultural companies like ADM, Bunge, and Dreyfus made that year. In fact, this makes Cargill bigger than the entire GDP of Morocco. But if you wanted to buy some Cargill shares, you would be fresh out of luck, because Cargill doesn't want your peasant money. It is not worth it to them.
The unlocking enzyme is not found to any dangerous degree anywhere in the body, except at the cancer cell, where it always is present in great quantity.
C'è un'attenzione, negli ultimi anni alla tutela dell'olio di oliva, come di altri prodotti italiani, però non sono ancora sufficienti controlli a evitare le truffe.
It almost seems like encouragement for criminals. Further south, in Puglia, lies the largest area of intensive olive oil production. It's here that traffickers have developed one of the most daring cases of food fraud in recent years. Ludovico Vaccaro came across them by chance. Their code name is Operation Yellow Gold.
Cargill has purposely remained a private company. For a lot of companies, going public on the stock market is the dream. But Cargill knows that if they went public, they would have to report everything to the shareholders, which would expose them to a lot of public scrutiny. But for what? It's not like they need the money. They already secretly control the food industry. There's a reason why their name doesn't ring a bell. Why? Well, you can't boycott something you don't know about, right? And there's a lot to boycott about.
The result is that vitamin B17 is unlocked at the cancer cell. It becomes poisonous to the cancer cell, and only to the cancer cell. There's another important enzyme called rhodinase, which we shall identify as the protecting enzyme. The reason is that it has the ability to neutralize cyanide by converting it instantly into byproducts that actually are beneficial and essential for health.
È nata quasi per caso, perché è stato visto che venivano vendute delle bottiglie di olio a 3 euro, 3,50 euro. Ora l'olio di oliva extravergine, anche al contadino che lo produce, costa di più. Quindi è subito nato il sospetto che non potesse essere olio extravergine di oliva.
Sent for analysis by the investigators, these bottles turned out to contain rapeseed oil. At this stage, Ludovico Vaccaro does not yet realize the size of the traffic.
own an agriculture business, you're at the constant whims of nature. Droughts, floods, global shortages of seeds. All of that can be a very serious threat to your main moneymakers. What if your primary food export suddenly dried up one day? And that was the exact position Cargill found themselves in 1997 during the Asian financial crisis. See, at the time, Cargill was sourcing a lot of its crops from the Philippines, Taiwan, Indonesia, and Korea. But when Asia fell into a financial crisis, it caused a lot of the agriculture producers Cargill was buying from to close down.
This enzyme is found in great quantities in every part of the body except the cancer cell, which consequently is not protected. Here then is a biochemical process that destroys cancer cells, while at the same time nourishes and sustains non-cancer cells. It's an intricate and perfect mechanism of nature that simply couldn't have been accidental. There's much speculation today about carcinogens, the things that supposedly cause cancer.
In tutte queste confezioni, sia la bottiglia da 1 litro, sia quelle più piccole, quelle tipiche da ristorante, erano indicati degli oleifici inesistenti. Cioè proprio non esisteva. Addirittura non solo non esisteva l'oleificio, ma spesso non esisteva proprio quella via in quel paese in cui veniva indicata. Erano degli oleifici fantasma, ghost. Abbiamo fatto intercettazioni telefoniche. Abbiamo fatto delle intercettazioni telematiche sulle mail, abbiamo fatto accertamenti patrimoniali, abbiamo messo GPS per seguire i camion, abbiamo fatto servizi di pedinamento. Insomma, è stata fatta un'indagine molto, molto complessa che è durata 2 anni.
These are methods comparable to those used against the mafia. In this case, it was an entire clandestine organization made up of 34 people.
Suddenly, Cargill couldn't get soy, wheat, and corn from these countries at the same prices they were before. So Cargill ended up losing $4 billion, which at the time was the equivalent of 8 years of profit for them. It was one of Cargill's biggest losses to date, and it plunged them into debts. Understandably, the Cargill family panicked. So they shook up management and put a new guy in charge to hopefully lead them back to the promised land. And the man they chose to do that was Warren Stoley.
We're told that researchers now have proven that smoking, or excessive exposure to the sun, or chemical additives to our food, or even certain viruses, all can cause cancer.
Qui si vede l'arrivo dell'olio, quindi olio sfuso che è arrivato in Italia e viene trasportato dentro l'oleificio e veniva da navi cisterna da varie parti del mondo. Qui invece vediamo il camion che partono per la Germania. Penso che un camion di questi conteneva più di 20.000 litri. Guardi che macchinari, no? Sofisticati per l'imbottigliamento. Questo per fare le etichette. Cioè era una industria vera e propria.
A perfectly structured network which bypassed the Italian food surveillance system. The transporters imported rapeseed oil, most often from Turkey, from the nearest port, Ancona. Usually it was out of date. The network leader directed the transformation of the rapeseed oil into fake olive oil in the clandestine workshop. The resellers then took charge of it and travelled the roads to sell it to Italian, Swiss and German restaurants. Some of them were renowned and even visited by the German Chancellor or the Italian President.
Guardi, questa è la questo è la sostanza, questo che vede, questo colore verde intenso, poi veniva messo, bastano poche gocce e dava all'olio di semi che ha di solito una colorazione più chiara, no? Quel tipico colore verde che è il tipico dell'olio. Poi aggiungendo a volte il beta-carotene si cercava di dare anche dal punto di vista del profumo una caratteristica organolettica, diciamo noi, che si avvicinasse all'olio.
One of Cargill's most loyal employees that had been working there since 1969. And when Warren Stoley stepped up as the head of Cargill, he did in fact lead them back to the promised land, but at a huge cost.
But as we have seen, the real cause is an enzyme and vitamin deficiency. These other things merely are the specific triggers that start the process. Anything that produces prolonged stress or damage to the body can trigger off the production of estrogen as a part of the healing process. If this goes unchecked because the body lacks the necessary chemical ingredients to fight back, then the result is cancer.
Cargill needed to dig themselves out of that $4 billion pit. And since one of their most lucrative crops was coca, they went on the hunt for an ultra-cheap source, and they eventually found it on the Ivory Coast. During the 90s, children were being trafficked from Mali into the Ivory Coast for slave labor. These kids weren't being paid, they were barely fed, they were physically abused, and were basically held hostage on these farms. One child slave came forward saying that they were forced to spray pesticides on coca crops without any protective clothing. Others say that they were whipped with branches and left in solitary confinement. According to other reports, children who tried to escape were forced to drink urine as punishment. Others say that their feet were cut open and pepper would be rubbed into their wounds. But the benefit of all this child labor is that these farms were able to produce extremely cheap coca. So companies like Nestle, Hershey, Mars, and Cargill put their orders in as fast as possible. In 2005, the International Labor Rights Fund found out about Cargill's connection to these slave camps and filed a lawsuit against them. As of today, the case still hasn't been resolved, and since then, Cargill has just continued growing their coca business. In 2018, Cargill put together plans to expand their coca storehouses in Abidjan, a city in the Ivory Coast. In 2019, they invested $113 million into coca processing plants in both the Ivory Coast and Ghana, while at the same time, they keep saying they're against child labor in the press. With coca on lockdown, now Cargill just needed some cheap land.
It's not surprising, then, that Italian mafias have turned their attention to these new types of trafficking. Now, anti-mafia brigades are discovering food counterfeits among other illegal commodities, such as weapons or drugs. In 2017, during the arrest of one of the most powerful street gangs in Calabria, Italian police officers uncovered a fake olive oil made from industrial lubricants that was being exported to the United States.
La mafia e le organizzazioni criminali in genere, ma quelle mafiose a maggior ragione, va sempre in un'unica direzione, dove ci sono gli affari, dove si fanno soldi e si fa denaro.
Vous avez des entreprises qui sont mafieuses, mais elles ne vous le disent pas, quoi. Vous ne le savez pas. Vous avez des belles entreprises qui sont détenues en partie par la mafia, mais ils ne vont pas vous le dire, nous c'est la mafia, bienvenue chez nous.
The mafia has infiltrated wholesale markets, supermarket chains, and large European companies. How far does their influence reach?
Oggi assistiamo a forme di criminalità più evolute, cioè non si va più a estorcere il commerciante, l'imprenditore, ma è la stessa criminalità che diventa imprenditrice. È un salto di qualità.
Specific carcinogens, therefore, do not cause cancer. They merely determine where it's going to occur. Of course, nature's defenses against cancer include more than just the pancreatic enzymes and vitamin B17. Research has shown that an important role also may be played by other enzymes, other vitamins, oxygenation of the blood, pH levels, and even body temperature. Vitamin B17 seems to be the most vital and direct acting of all these factors, but none of them can be ignored, for they're an interlocking part of the total natural mechanism.
The food processing industry and the billions that it generates has an irresistible attraction for traffickers of all kinds. We probably only know the tip of the iceberg of this hidden world. It is partially because more and more of our food comes from other continents. Under the effects of globalization, all food industries are bringing in ever-increasing amounts of food at increasingly competitive prices.
Souvent, les produits qu'on achète, nous, en tant qu'acheteurs ou traders, on ne les voit pas. Donc pour nous, c'est juste un nom, une ligne de code sur un écran ou un cahier des charges.
La mondialisation, elle augmente le risque de fraude parce qu'on perd le contrôle de la longueur des chaînes, des intervenants tout le long de la chaîne d'approvisionnement.
Cargill's main business is storing and processing crops, so obviously they need cheap land to grow cheap crops on. Ideally, the land should be free. So to get their hands on some free land, Cargill got involved with land grabbing in the late 2000s. And yes, land grabbing sounds exactly like what you think it is. In 2011, one of Cargill's palm oil suppliers sent a fleet of security guards to open fire on a nearby Indonesian village. The reason? A villager apparently stole a piece of palm fruits, which may or may not have been true. So in response, the guards evicted 100 people from their homes and bulldozed the entire village to the ground.
One food in particular is subject to international trafficking. It is synonymous with health food, yet it is one of the most counterfeited. The control of fraudsters has increased since fish is no longer caught in coastal areas, but in distant seas.
Coincidentally, that land provided the perfect canvas for a new field of palm fruits. A few years later, Cargill's soy producers in Brazil were accused of sending a private security force into a nearby indigenous village. They smashed down doors, assaulted children, kicked pregnant women in the stomach, 7 indigenous people were shot, several women lost their babies, and what was all this violence for? Because one person from the tribe trespassed on company farmland. But if those indigenous people end up abandoning their homes because of this, conveniently these indigenous people never ended up coming back, so their land was up for grabs. It was turned into more farmland to produce even cheaper crops for Cargill to buy up.
Fortunately, it's not necessary for man to understand fully every theoretical aspect of this mechanism in order to make it work for him in practice. All that he really needs to know is the necessity of eating foods rich in all the vitamins and minerals, and of minimizing damage or stress to the body.
Sure, a land grab here and there is nice, but in the grand scheme of things, it just wasn't enough. Cargill needed way more land, and conveniently in 2004, a giant patch of natural rainforest the size of Hawaii was being cleared out of the Amazon rainforest. And what did they use this land for? Why, the most nutritious crop out there, soy. Soy was planted on these lands, and it was offered to foreign countries at dirt cheap prices, and Cargill made sure that they were first in line to buy. But you might remember that there was a whole eco-friendly movement that was starting to pick up during this time. Reusable water bottles, fair trade coffee, Save the Rainforest t-shirts, and they did not like what Cargill was up to. So Greenpeace launched their Save the Amazon campaign in 2006, and in response, Cargill publicly agreed to no longer purchase soy from the deforested lands in the Amazon. Cargill even received a special award in environmental leadership for this new agreement. But there was a loophole. Greenpeace didn't say anything about Cerrado, another lesser-known rainforest in Brazil that is still equally important. Cerrado contains 5% of the world's plant and animal species and 8 of Brazil's rivers. So instead of getting soy from the Amazon rainforest, Cargill just switched to getting soy from Cerrado, and no one was the wiser. While deforestation of the Amazon rainforest slowed down exponentially between 2008 and 2012, deforestation in Cerrado sped up. Fast forward to 2018, and Cerrado had lost 95,000 square kilometers of rainforest. That is 2/3 more than what was ever cleared in the Amazon. And the Amazon is 3 times the size, so a giant chunk of the Cerrado rainforest is now gone.
Tuna, in particular, has sparked the interest of fraudsters. To meet the growing demand for raw tuna consumption, a very specific market, held by 200 seafood professionals, has been established in Europe. This fish is caught in the Pacific or Indian Ocean, then quickly frozen at -18 degrees. Its red meat has high value and is expensive. The arrival of raw tuna at low prices raised the alarm. In 2015, a dozen manufacturers, including French, German and Italian, realized that their business was at risk. One of them agreed to testify, although with his face hidden.
Un professionnel ne peut pas croire qu'un produit est à moitié prix sans qu'il y ait un souci. C'est totalement impossible.
These seafood manufacturers secretly conducted their own investigation.
En cherchant à comprendre, on s'est rendu compte qu'il y avait, comme c'est assez souvent le cas maintenant, un ajout d'eau pour faire baisser le prix de revient. Le but de l'ajout d'eau, c'est la compétitivité.
Une grosse partie des filets de poisson surgelés, voire même frais, sont souvent injectés au saumure. Donc vous avez dans le produit une injection sous pression de saumure avec des polyphosphates, avec des éléments qui permettent de conserver l'eau à l'intérieur.
The reality of the vitamin B17 concept of cancer has been proven in the laboratory beyond any doubt. For example, Dr. Dean Burke, head of the cytochemistry section of the National Cancer Institute, has reported that in a series of tests on animal tissue, the B17 had no effect on normal cells, but released so much cyanide and benzaldehyde when it came in contact with cancer cells that not one of them could survive.
So Greenpeace approached Cargill again and demanded that they stop exploiting Cerrado. In response, Cargill put on their best PR face. They didn't overtly agree to Greenpeace's demands and instead created a Cargill-branded soy action plan. This plan promised that $30 million would be put towards research for alternatives to growing crops on native lands. It sounded very noble, very ambitious, like progress was actually being made, when in reality, this plan was as vague as can be. But it worked. After they presented this plan to the world, they just turned around and went straight back to buying soy from Cerrado. Cargill's argument against not buying soy from Cerrado is that if they moved out, someone else was just gonna move in. Like China, for example, who buys most of Brazil's soy. You wouldn't want to support China now, would you? We gotta keep supporting American jobs in the American economy.
These are illegal practices from Indonesia, Vietnam and China. Gorging fish with water in this way increases their weight and makes them more expensive, a widespread fraud technique. However, there is something much more serious in the case of tuna.
On s'est rendu compte qu'il y avait surtout un changement radical de matière première dont la qualité n'avait rien à voir avec la qualité perceptible par le consommateur. Et cette différence, elle est générée par des traitements chimiques.
They filmed this discovery secretly during a visit to a Spanish competitor. That day, they noticed the presence of strange machinery through which the brown tuna loins were passing. Butchers are allowed to use them. They are used to inject nitrates, a preservative that gives the hams their brightness and pink colour. Their use, however, is becoming more and more controversial. Immediately, the manufacturers understood that their competitors had found a trick to turn the tuna red.
Le thon a une particularité, c'est que le consommateur juge sa valeur par sa couleur. Donc s'il est rouge, il vaut plus cher, s'il est marron, il vaut pas cher. Et là, en l'occurrence, c'est un produit marron bas de gamme qui a été transformé en un produit rouge pour pouvoir le vendre comme un haut de gamme.
We replicated this chemical transformation in the laboratory. The injection of nitrates will allow the oxidized meat to regain its color within a few hours. This recolored tuna, which can be mistaken for fresh tuna, is likely to cause intoxication and allergic shock.
Si on met sur le marché des produits qui sont pas bons, qui font pas plaisir aux consommateurs, il va s'en détourner. La deuxième chose, c'est que si ils sont pas bons pour sa santé, un jour on risque un clash médiatique qui peut tuer un marché.
The dissident industry group, driven by fear of scandal, decided to lay everything out on the table.
Dans un premier temps, on est allé voir les autorités françaises. Les autorités françaises nous ont dit soit, mais on ne sait pas quoi faire et puis de toute façon on n'a pas assez de moyens, donc c'est pas à nous de nous en occuper. Donc on s'est adressé à la communauté européenne.
Eux, ils avaient la certitude que c'était de la fraude. Effectivement, ça nous a paru tout de suite très sérieux. Très complexe, mais très sérieux.
In 2016, a Spanish police search discovered that the whistleblowers were not wrong. Here is tuna caught in El Salvador and Panama. The brown flesh indicates that they should no longer be eaten raw. We will also find the injection machines and high doses of nitrates. Despite all this evidence, the incriminated Spanish manufacturers tried to defend themselves.
Vous avez des industries qui viennent avec des juristes et qui vont dire que ce qu'ils font est légal. Et donc il y a une pression qui s'établit sur les autorités compétentes. Donc les autorités compétentes, avec le soutien juridique de la Commission, ont établi que les industries, celles-ci espagnoles, donc, utilisaient ces produits à tort et donc leur ont interdit de les utiliser.
Despite this, the fraud continued. In 2017, there were 454 cases of poisoning in Europe due to tuna spiked with nitrates. This is a dangerous health hazard, and the European Commission had to react.
He said, "When we add Laetrile to a cancer culture under the microscope, we can see the cancer cells dying off like flies." We've said that vitamin B17 is harmless to non-cancer cells. This is true, but perhaps it would be more accurate to say that it's as harmless as any substance can be. After all, even life-essential water or oxygen can be fatal if taken in unnaturally large doses. And this is true also of vitamin B17.
80% du secteur qui fournissait ce thon frais était affecté. Donc ça voulait dire que on avait quasiment tout le marché européen qui était affecté par cette fraude. Donc ce qui s'est passé, c'est qu'on a monté ces opérations, cette fois-ci, dans le cadre d'Europol.
Europol is the European crime fighting organisation. They mobilised the police force of 11 different countries. This operation shut down one of the largest food trafficking operations in 2018. The result was a record 131 tons of seized tuna.
Ça a été la première collaboration sur un sujet européen et ça a été un franc succès.
Today, Cargill is a huge company. They employ over 155,000 people worldwide. They handle a quarter of the country's total grain exports. 20% of our beef and pork comes from their factories. 6 million tons of sugar is shipped by Cargill each year. And when you're this big making this much money, it can be easy to let things slip through the cracks. In the year 2000, around 16 million pounds of sliced turkey processed by Cargill's Texas plant was recalled because it was contaminated with Listeria, a deadly bacteria. The meat caused 7 deaths, 3 stillbirths, and 29 illnesses across 10 American states. Later on that same year, a 3-year-old died from E. coli poisoning after eating beef that came from one of Cargill's processing plants. In 2009, more E. coli tainted burgers were sent out, this time causing a woman to become paralyzed from the waist down. Why does this keep happening? Because Cargill had discovered an innovative way to save money on their meat processing costs. Here's how. Instead of using expensive cuts of meat to make your burgers, you want to use all those bits of meat and intestines that fall onto your factory floor. Just scoop all that up, soak it in some ammonia to kill the bacteria, throw it into a grinder, and out comes burger patties that cost 25% less. And sure, fecal matter may end up in there every now and then, especially if you're using intestines and all that good stuff. But as long as it's treated with bleach, and the animals are fed human-grade antibiotics to reduce infection, everything should be a-okay. Just package it up and ship it out for the masses to consume.
Can't have a bunch of small players delivering such an important food source to the nation's consumers. You have to have larger companies that can do it cheaply and can keep costs down.
Which brings us to today. But you want to know what's even more sketchier than Cargill? America's tap water. If you're drinking tap water in America right now, you gotta stop. Because not only is it filled with fluoride, but it's also filled with heavy metals, chemicals, bacteria, and guess what else? You know all those drugs that Americans take like birth control that's filled with hormones? Yeah, people pee those chemicals out, it gets flushed down, that wastewater gets sent to a water treatment plant, but most of these treatment plants in America don't have the capability to filter out chemicals like that, so it gets sent straight back to your tap. That means every time you're drinking from the tap, every time you're showering, you are getting an entire cocktail of these things straight into your body.
This is one of the most important trafficking operations that has been shut down to date. 79 criminals were arrested throughout Europe in several illegal workshops, notably in Spain but also in France, Italy and Malta. Thanks to the monitoring of the network, the investigators learned that the quantities of nitrates used had the fraudsters complaining of severe itching. The fraudsters managed to make up to 12 million euros in profit per year.
For example, there is one case of a man who reportedly died from devouring almost a cup of apple seeds. Incidentally, the case never has been authenticated, but assuming it's true, if the man had eaten the apples also, he would have obtained enough extra rotamines from the whole fruit to offset the effect of even that many seeds in his stomach. But that would have required that he eat several cases of apples, which of course would have been impossible in the first place. Nature can do only so much. It cannot anticipate excess of this kind. Therefore, it's wise to follow the simple rule that one should not eat at one time more seeds than he likely would consume if he also were eating a reasonable quantity of the whole fruit. This is a common sense rule with a large safety margin that can be followed with complete confidence.
High fructose corn syrup is also associated with non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is a big problem in today's world.
And when it comes to the laboratory forms of vitamin B17, known as amygdalin or Laetrile, there is even less cause for concern. For over 100 years, standard pharmacology reference books have described this substance as non-toxic. After a century of use in all parts of the world, there never has been a single reported case of related death or even serious illness. In one series of tests, white rats were fed 70 times the normal human dose of Laetrile, and the only side effects produced were greater appetite, weight gain, and superior health. Just what one would expect from taking a vitamin. Aspirin tablets are 20 times more toxic than the equivalent amount of Laetrile. And in fact, Dr. Burke of the National Cancer Institute has demonstrated that Laetrile is even less toxic than sugar.
BHT or BHA is what you'll see in the ingredient list. This is a petroleum-derived chemical and it's used to stabilize food. Chances are, if you've read labels, you've come across it.
Let's turn now to the all-important question. Does Laetrile or vitamin B17 actually control cancer in human beings? And if it does, is there statistical evidence to support that claim? Spokesmen for organized medicine say no.
It is an incredibly lucrative fraud that has not ended with the impressive takedown of the network. Despite the increased controls throughout Europe, tuna spiked with various chemicals are still seized on a regular basis.
These 4 cases are about products produced.
And when something starts with artificial, it's a pretty good indication that you should not be eating it because it's fake. I use the term fake foods. Well, that would be one of them because it is fake. It does not belong in your food.
Within the food fraud network, European officials are experiencing an increased number of alerts on potential frauds year after year. They now affect all food products.
Ce qu'on sait de manière certaine, c'est que la fraude alimentaire se développe de manière exponentielle. Et c'est de plus en plus inquiétant. Tout le monde s'alarme de l'ampleur que ça prend.
How do you deal with such a tidal wave? Fraudsters enjoy all the facilities offered by a world where the free movement of goods is key. Throughout the supply chain, the responsibilities that manufacturers have are therefore immense. Importers, traders, processors, wholesalers. Legally, these are the guarantors of the authenticity of what we eat. To do this, they perform thousands of tests each year called self-checks. Although it's impossible to know how many frauds are detected this way, the results of these self-checks are kept in the dark.
Il faut savoir que la fraude alimentaire, si les industriels la constatent par des autocontrôles ou sont au courant ou ont relevé ça sur leur chaîne d'approvisionnement, eh bien, ils n'ont absolument aucune obligation de faire remonter l'information aux autorités. Et ça, c'est un vrai problème.
Almost all official opposition to Laetrile is based upon a 1953 report by the Cancer Commission of the California Medical Association. The report said flatly, no satisfactory evidence has been produced to indicate any significant cytotoxic effect of Laetrile on the cancer cell. Using this report as a primary reference, government agencies soon declared that it was illegal to prescribe, transport, or even recommend Laetrile. The report was written by the committee chairman, Dr. Ian McDonald, and the committee secretary, Dr. Henry Garland. There were 7 other prominent physicians appointed to the committee, but none of them, not even the men who wrote the report, had any personal experience with Laetrile. They had based their conclusions entirely on the written records of other experimenters.
Only frauds dangerous to health must be disclosed to the authorities. The others, which are more numerous, depend on the goodwill of the manufacturers.
Next on our list is aspartame. Now this one's a big point of contention for a lot of people. Many people want to argue that aspartame is completely safe, but aspartame is the world's most widely used artificial sweetener. It's marketed under many names like NutraSweet, Equal, there's one called Sugar Twin, and then AminoSweet.
Les industriels ne rapportent encore pas assez aux autorités compétentes les suspicions de fraude qu'elles font. Il faut bien avoir conscience que l'industrie, ce sont eux qui font le plus de contrôles.
Il faudrait améliorer la réglementation européenne pour faire peser des nouvelles obligations sur les industriels.
C'est une question de volonté et de courage. De courage, d'indépendance par rapport au lobby, par exemple. D'accepter d'être moins copain-copain avec les grosses multinationales, d'être moins dans la main avec la finance. Donc ça veut dire réellement considérer que la priorité est du côté du consommateur et pas de l'industriel ou de ceux qui ont les poches pleines.
This impunity extends to the representatives of large distribution chains. They too have a legal obligation to put food on the shelves that is what it claims to be. However, they are almost never prosecuted in cases of food fraud.
A lot of the bright colored, vibrant foods that kids are attracted to, that's where you find a lot of your coloring.
The scientific judgment of these men perhaps can be best appreciated by noting that McDonald and Garland were the doctors who had made headlines claiming that there was no connection between cigarette smoking and lung cancer.
Look, if we wonder why kids are struggling with so many health issues, this would be one of the things that we should work on avoiding.
In fact, McDonald had claimed that 24 cigarettes per day was a harmless pastime, and then he said, "A pack a day keeps lung cancer away." But even more important than this scientific ineptitude is the fact that both men actually had falsified their summary of the Laetrile experiments. For example, their report claimed that microscopic examinations of tumors taken from patients treated with Laetrile showed no evidence of beneficial chemical effect.
Il faudrait que les chaînes de supermarchés soient obligées de faire des tests, soient obligées de montrer patte blanche pour enrayer la fraude. Pourquoi ? Parce que s'ils étaient obligés de faire ces tests et donc de produire les résultats, ils s'exposeraient potentiellement à des sanctions qui seraient catastrophiques et puis une mauvaise publicité. Donc, quelque part, ce cercle serait vertueux. Donc, il faut changer les règles du jeu qui s'imposent à ces acteurs extrêmement puissants.
Now I want to talk about fluoride because this is always a point of contention too. Many people say fluoride is completely healthy and it's necessary for your teeth. Well, there's a study that was published in the Journal of JAMA Pediatrics, and basically what they found is that increased levels of fluoride exposure during pregnancy led to a decline in the IQ of the child when the child was born.
At the end of our journey into the heart of fraud, we can no longer look at our food in the same way. How many of these products are counterfeit without anyone noticing? How many fraudsters are we funding with our globalized food consumption patterns? No one is aware of the extent of the fraud, and yet a widespread concern is spreading. Consumers are increasingly concerned about the effects of food on their health. By targeting our food, criminals and professional fraudsters are making us feel increasingly worried about what is really on our plates.
Yet, 10 years later, it was learned that one of the pathologists conducting the examinations, in fact, did report several instances of tumor destruction, which he stated at the time could well have been caused by the action of Laetrile.
I'm Dr. Zarowski, and whenever we buy food, it's so important to make sure that we're reading the labels because we're going to find some ingredients in there that are pretty unsavory and damaging to your health. Now, artificial flavorings is another thing. So we talk about artificial colorings, and we said if something starts with artificial, you should really avoid it. Well, artificial flavorings is an umbrella term that encompasses 700 different synthetic chemicals, many of which are considered to be harmful to consume. in the product's label. The federal regulations, Title 21, processed food manufacturers aren't even required to identify these ubiquitous compounds.
Code of the Federal Regulations, Title 21, processed food manufacturers aren't even required to identify these ubiquitous compounds.
McDonald and Garland had not told the truth.
And in 2007, there was a study published in Lancet that examined the effects of artificial colorings in children. They found that consuming artificial colorings and preservatives increase hyperactivity in kids. Now, we're talking about kids specifically because, like I said, this is where you will find most artificial colorings. And when something starts with artificial, it's a pretty good indication that you should not be eating it because it's fake. High fructose corn syrup. Now, this is a very inexpensive sweetener that's used in a lot of food and drinks today.
The report also stated that laboratory technicians had tried unsuccessfully to release cyanide from Laetrile.
Now, high fructose corn syrup is particularly damaging because it has to be converted by the liver to glucose, glycogen, or even fat before it can be used as an energy source for your body.
This was offered as powerful evidence that the entire theory was a fraud.
And high fructose corn syrup has been shown to increase triglyceride production, leading to a variety of different illnesses. Anything from obesity, metabolic syndrome, hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and even an increase in amount of body fat. Linked to high fructose corn syrup usage also increases the risk of developing several types of cancer. There was a team of scientists from Cornell University.
And yet, just 2 months prior to that, the American Medical Association Chemical Lab had reported that it had been successful in releasing cyanide from Laetrile.
High fructose corn syrup to mice, and they found that high fructose corn syrup actually promoted the growth of intestinal cancer cells. The thing is that's very interesting about this is that gastrointestinal cancer continues to skyrocket today. They're finding in animals, it increases cancer cells in your gut. Well, I don't know, maybe it's happening to us as well.
And of course, other labs have done this also, including the California Food and Drug Lab.
Aspartame is a synthetic chemical, and it's composed of an amino acid, phenylalanine, and also aspartic acid with a methyl ester. When consumed, the methyl ester breaks down into methanol, which can actually be converted into formaldehyde.
And of course, the cytochemistry lab of the National Cancer Institute.
There's dozens of studies that have linked aspartame, which is, as I said, the world's most widely used artificial sweetener, to serious health problems, including cancer, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, seizures, stroke, dementia, and a lot of other really negative intestinal problems.
Again, McDonald and Garland had obscured the truth.
It's also been associated with even headaches and mood disorders, and even beyond headache, migraines. We have to make sure that we're avoiding aspartame, in my opinion. Look, if you think it's something that's healthy for you, I guess go ahead and use it. Personally, me and anybody I'm making recommendations to, I would say avoid it.
Another important aspect of this report is that the patients had received extremely small doses of Laetrile, much too small to prove anything.
Acylsulfame K, or acylsulfame potassium. It's a chemical sweetener.
Today, it's not uncommon to administer 2 or 3 grams of the material in a single injection.
BHT is a preservative that is found in foods such as cereals, gums, fast food, processed foods, drink mixes, shortening, snack foods, and a whole bunch of others.
Generally, 30 or 40 grams are required before the patient can report tangible signs of improvement.
This compound is also found in a lot of food packaging, animal feeds, cosmetics, pharmaceuticals, and rubber and plastic. Okay, so this is a very dangerous chemical in my opinion, but it's once again used to stabilize food and keep food from going bad, basically help food last longer on the shelf.
But in the California experiment, the maximum total dosage was only about 2 grams, and even that was divided among 12 injections.
BHA or BHA has been shown to induce allergic reactions in the skin. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies BHA as a possible human carcinogen. The European Commission on Endocrine Disruptors has also listed BHA as a Category 1 priority substance.
5 patients had received only 2 injections, and 5 had received only 1.
And they found that it's going to interfere with hormone function such as estrogen. Long-term exposure to BHT in mice was shown to cause their liver to become toxic along with their kidneys and their lungs.
So it's not surprising that these experiments had failed to obtain convincing evidence that Laetrile worked.
BHT can act as a tumor promoter in certain situations. Some evidence suggests that high doses can mimic estrogen, which we mentioned, and then it will affect obviously female hormones and then male hormones as well, and it could lead to even infertility.
What is surprising, however, is that this and similar discredited reports continue to be cited by the American Cancer Society as proof that Laetrile is
one of the things that's very interesting, and we see this a lot, where something is considered to be dangerous for an animal, but then is considered to be completely fine for a human. And in the case of BHT, that is exactly what we find. Both the Protection of Marine Environment of Northeast Atlantic and the United Nations Environment Program list BHA as a chemical that is dangerous to marine life, but somehow it is completely safe for you.
The hoax. But let's return to the original side of this question. What evidence is there to support the claim that Laetrile does work?
Published in the International Journal of Occupational and Environmental Health in 2012, there was a research paper by UCLA scientists, and they found that all of the 9 currently used approved food dyes in the US have concerning health problems to various degrees. Specifically, they noted that Red 3 causes cancer in animals, and there's evidence that several other dyes are also a carcinogen.
As we have seen, the health records of the Hunzicuts, the Eskimos, and many other groups around the world are statistically conclusive that vitamin B17 does control cancer in human beings.
Red 40, Yellow 5, and Yellow 6 have been found to be contaminated with benzidine or even other carcinogens, and at least 4 dyes, such as Blue 1, Red 40, Yellow 5, and Yellow 6, cause hypersensitivity reactions.
With an effectiveness approaching 100%. There can be little controversy over that. But what about cancer once it already has started? Can B17 restore a person to health after he's contracted the disease? The answer is yes, if it's caught in time, and if the patient isn't too badly damaged by prior X-ray treatment or toxic drugs.
Now, on the other hand, PubChem of the U.S. National Institute of Health's chemistry database considers fluoride a toxic chemical and lists numerous mental health effects that it can have on you, including things like disabilities, memory disorders, and also sleep disorders. So there's no reason to doubt that it's unhealthy for you. And one of the big arguments is that, well, we have healthier teeth if we use it. Well, there's no study that proves that countries that use fluoridated water versus those that don't have healthier teeth.
Unfortunately, most cancer victims start taking Laetrile only after their disease is so far advanced that they've been given up as hopeless by routine medical channels.
The story goes is that there was funding by companies, large corporations, that were trying to get rid of this toxic chemical, and they basically came up with sham studies to prove that it was going to improve your dental health. And so that's kind of how that whole thing started, but at the end of the day, it's a neurotoxin.
Usually they've been told that they have only a few more months or weeks to live. And it's in this tragic state of near death that they turn to vitamin therapy as a last resort. If they die, and indeed many of them do, then they are counted as...
Harvard School of Public Health and China's Medical University performed a joint analysis in 27 studies on the effects of fluoride, and the researchers found a strong correlation between fluoride and adverse effects on brain development. Fluoride, especially when added to drinking water, nearly doubles the risk of developing hypothyroidism or an underactive thyroid.
Statistical failures for Laetrile. In reality, it's a victory for Laetrile that any of them should be saved at this stage. For once a deficiency disease has progressed so far, the damage it does simply can't be reversed.
So the reason for this is because fluoride is going to bind to the iodine receptors in your thyroid and it's going to displace iodine, causing issues for you. So completely unhealthy.
A man who has been shot with a gun can have the bullet removed, but still die from a wound. Likewise, a patient can have his cancer destroyed by vitamin B17 and still die from the irreversible damage already done to his vital organs. And so, in view of this tremendous handicap, the number of terminal patients who have been restored to health is most impressive. In fact, there literally are thousands of such case histories in the medical record.
And this single company controls a massive share of your food supply. They're responsible for supplying food for some of the biggest brands out there, like McDonald's, Burger King, Kellogg's, Mars, Dunkin' Donuts, Unilever, Safeway, Kroger, Albertsons, Audi, Tesco, and
The American Cancer Society is trying to create the impression that the only ones who claim to have been saved by Laetrile are those who merely were hypochondriacs and who never really had cancer in the first place. But the record reveals quite a different story. Let's take a look at just a few examples. Mr. David Edmonds of Pinole, California, was operated on in June of 1971 for cancer of the colon, which also had metastasized or spread to the bladder. When the surgeon opened him up, he found that the malignant tissue was so widespread it was almost impossible to remove it all. The blockage of the intestines was relieved by severing the colon and bringing the open end to the outside of his abdomen, a procedure known as a colostomy. 5 months later, the cancer had returned, and Mr. Edmonds was told that he had only a few more months to live. Mrs. Edmonds, who was a nurse, had heard about Laetrile and decided to give it a try. 6 months later, instead of lying on his deathbed, Mr. Edmonds surprised the doctors by feeling well enough to resume an almost normal routine. An exploratory cystoscopy of the bladder revealed that the cancer there had completely disappeared.
Cargill may have started out as a single shack on the side of the road, but today they're a whole lot bigger. Cargill is the largest private company in the US, and if they were public, they would be ranked number 15 on the Fortune 500 list, just in front of AT&T. And Cargill has its fingers in almost every pie imaginable, from grains to livestock to palm oil and coca, to metals, animal feed, energy, and even hedge funds.
At his own insistence, he was readmitted to the hospital to see if his colon could be put back together again. In surgery, they found nothing even resembling cancer tissue. So they reconnected the colon and sent him home to recuperate. It was the first time in the history of the hospital that a reverse colostomy had been performed.
Their total revenue in 2021 was $135 billion, which is almost double the amount of what other big agricultural companies like ADM, Bunge, and Dreyfus made that year. In fact, this makes Cargill bigger than the entire GDP of Morocco.
Mr. Edmonds now is living a near-normal life of health and vigor. In 1967, Mrs. Joan Wilkinson had a tumor removed from her lower left leg, just below the thigh.
Cargill has purposely remained a private company. For a lot of companies, going public on the stock market is the dream. But Cargill knows that if they went public, they would have to report everything to the shareholders, which would expose them to a lot of public scrutiny. But for what? It's not like they need the money. They already secretly control the food industry. There's a reason why their name doesn't ring a bell. Why? Well, you can't boycott something you don't know about, right?
4 months later, there was a recurrence requiring additional surgery and the removal of muscle and bone. A year later, a lump in the groin appeared, and a biopsy revealed that her cancer had returned and was spreading. Her doctor told her that surgery would be necessary again, but this time they would have to amputate the leg, the hip, and probably the bladder and one of the kidneys as well.
When you own an agriculture business, you're at the constant whims of nature. Droughts, floods, global shortages of seeds. All of that can be a very serious threat to your main moneymakers. What if your primary food export suddenly dried up one day? And that was the exact position Cargill found themselves in 1997 during the Asian financial crisis. See, at the time, Cargill was sourcing a lot of its crops from the Philippines, Taiwan, Indonesia, and Korea. But when Asia fell into a financial crisis, it caused a lot of the agriculture producers Cargill was buying from to close down. Suddenly, Cargill couldn't get soy, wheat, and corn from these countries at the same prices they were before. So Cargill ended up losing $4 billion, which at the time was the equivalent of 8 years of profit for them. It was one of Cargill's biggest losses to date, and it plunged them into debts. Understandably, the Cargill family panicked. So they shook up management and put a new guy in charge to hopefully lead them back to the promised land. And the man they chose to do that was Warren Stolle.
The plan was to open up her lungs first to see if cancer had located there. If it had, then they would not amputate, because there wouldn't be any chance of saving her anyway.
One of Cargill's most loyal employees that had been working there since 1969. And when Warren Stolle stepped up as the head of Cargill, he did in fact lead them back to the promised land, but at a huge cost.
At the urging of her sister and a mutual friend, Mrs. Wilkinson decided not to undergo surgery, but to try Laetrile instead. Her doctor was upset by this. He told her that if she didn't have the surgery, she couldn't possibly live longer than 12 weeks.
Cargill needed to dig themselves out of that $4 billion pit, and since one of their most lucrative crops was coca, they went on the hunt for an ultra-cheap source, and they eventually found it on the Ivory Coast. During the 90s, children were being trafficked from Mali into the Ivory Coast for slave labor. These kids weren't being paid, they were barely fed, they were physically abused, and were basically held hostage on these farms. One child slave came forward saying that they were forced to spray pesticides on coca crops without any protective clothing. Others say that they were whipped with branches and left in solitary confinement. According to other reports, children who tried to escape were forced to drink urine as punishment. Others say that their feet were cut open and pepper would be rubbed into their wounds. But the benefit of all this child labor is that these farms were able to produce extremely cheap coca. So companies like Nestle, Hershey, Mars, and Cargill put their orders in as fast as possible.
5 weeks after starting on Laetrile, the lump in her groin had disappeared. Today, years later, she's living a healthy and productive life.
In 2005, the International Labor Rights Fund found out about Cargill's connection to these slave camps and filed a lawsuit against them. As of today, the case still hasn't been resolved, and since then, Cargill has just continued growing their coca business. In 2018, Cargill put together plans to expand their coca storehouses in Abidjan, a city in the Ivory Coast. In 2019, they invested $113 million into coca processing plants in both the Ivory Coast and Ghana, while at the same time, they keep saying they're against child labor in the press. With coca on lockdown, now Cargill just needed some cheap land.
In 1972, Dr. Dale Danner, a podiatrist from Santa Paula, California, developed a pain in the right leg and a severe cough. X-rays revealed a carcinoma of both lungs and what appeared to be massive secondary tumors in the leg. The cancer was inoperable and resistant to radiotherapy. The prognosis was incurable and fatal.
Cargill's main business is storing and processing crops, so obviously they need cheap land to grow cheap crops on. Ideally, the land should be free. So to get their hands on some free land, Cargill got involved with land grabbing in the late 2000s.
At the insistence of his mother, Dr. Danner agreed to try Laetrile, although he had no faith in its effectiveness. Primarily just to please her, he obtained a large supply in Mexico.
And yes, land grabbing sounds exactly like what you think it is. In 2011, one of Cargill's palm oil suppliers sent a fleet of security guards to open fire on a nearby Indonesian village. The reason? A villager apparently stole a piece of palm fruits, which may or may not have been true.
But he was convinced from what he had read in the medical journals that it was nothing but quackery and a fraud. Perhaps it was even dangerous, he thought, for he noticed from the literature that it contained large amounts of cyanide. Within a few weeks, the pain and the coughing had progressed to the point where no amount of medication could hold it back. Forced to crawl on his hands and knees and unable to sleep for 3 days and nights, he became despondent and desperate.
So in response, the guards evicted 100 people from their homes and bulldozed the entire village to the ground. Coincidentally, that land provided the perfect canvas for a new field of palm fruits. A few years later, Cargill's soy producers in Brazil were accused of sending a private security force into a nearby indigenous village. They smashed down doors, assaulted children, kicked pregnant women in the stomach, 7 indigenous people were shot, several women lost their babies, and what was all this violence for? Because one person from the tribe trespassed on company farmland. But if those indigenous people end up abandoning their homes because of this, conveniently these indigenous people never ended up coming back, so their land was up for grabs.
Groggy from the lack of sleep, from the drugs, and from the pain. Finally, he turned to his supply of Laetrile.
It was turned into more farmland to produce even cheaper crops for Cargill to buy up.
Giving himself one more massive dose of medication, hopefully to bring on sleep, he then proceeded to administer the Laetrile directly into an artery. Before losing consciousness from the medication, Dr. Danner had succeeded in taking at least an entire 10-day supply, and possibly as high as a 20-day supply, all at once.
A land grab here and there is nice, but in the grand scheme of things, it just wasn't enough. Cargill needed way more land, and conveniently in 2004, a giant patch of natural rainforest the size of Hawaii was being cleared out of the Amazon rainforest. And what did they use this land for? Why, the most nutritious crop out there, soy. Soy was planted on these lands, and it was offered to foreign countries at dirt cheap prices, and Cargill made sure that they were first in line to buy. But you might remember that there was a whole eco-friendly movement that was starting to pick up during this time. Reusable water bottles, fair trade coffee, Save the Rainforest t-shirts, and they did not like what Cargill was up to.
When he awoke 36 hours later, much to his amazement, not only was he alive, but also the cough and pain were greatly reduced. His appetite had returned, and he was feeling better than he had in months. Reluctantly, he had to admit that Laetrile was working. So he obtained an additional supply and began routine treatment with smaller doses. 3 months later, he was back to work.
So Greenpeace launched their Save the Amazon campaign in 2006, and in response, Cargill publicly agreed to no longer purchase soy from the deforested lands in the Amazon. Cargill even received a special award in environmental leadership for this new agreement. But there was a loophole. Greenpeace didn't say anything about Cerrado, another lesser-known rainforest in Brazil that is still equally important. Cerrado contains 5% of the world's plant and animal species and 8 of Brazil's rivers. So instead of getting soy from the Amazon rainforest, Cargill just switched to getting soy from Cerrado, and no one was the wiser.
Since Laetrile was developed in 1952, there have been literally thousands of similar case histories reported and documented. And when all these are viewed as a group, they begin to take on the form of numerical statistics, which of course are more meaningful than individual cases.
While deforestation of the Amazon rainforest slowed down exponentially between 2008 and 2012, deforestation in Cerrado sped up. Fast forward to 2018, and Cerrado had lost 95,000 square kilometers of rainforest. That is 2/3 more than what was ever cleared in the Amazon. And the Amazon is 3 times the size, so a giant chunk of the Cerrado rainforest is now gone.
There have been at least 26 published medical papers written by well-known physicians who have used Laetrile experimentally in the treatment of their own patients, and who have concluded that Laetrile is both safe and effective in the treatment of cancer. The American Cancer Society and other spokesmen for the medical establishment would have us believe that only crackpots have endorsed this conclusion.
So Greenpeace approached Cargill again and demanded that they stop exploiting Cerrado. In response, Cargill put on their best PR face. They didn't overtly agree to Greenpeace's demands and instead created a Cargill-branded soy action plan. This plan promised that $30 million would be put towards research for alternatives to growing crops on native lands. It sounded very noble, very ambitious, like progress was actually being made, when in reality, this plan was as vague as can be. But it worked. After they presented this plan to the world, they just turned around and went straight back to buying soy from Cerrado. Cargill's argument against not buying soy from Cerrado is that if they moved out, someone else was just gonna move in. Like China, for example, who buys most of Brazil's soy. You wouldn't want to support China now, would you? We gotta keep supporting American jobs and the American economy.
But the doctors who conducted these experiments, and those who share their conclusions, are not quacks. Here are just a few of the names. In West Germany, there is Dr. Hans Nieper, director of the Department of Medicine at the Silbersee Hospital in Hanover. He is a pioneer in the medical use of cobalt and is credited with developing the anti-cancer drug cyclophosphamide. Undoubtedly, he is one of the world's most famous and respected cancer specialists. In Canada, there is Dr. N.R. Bouzian, director of research laboratories at St. Jean d'Arc Hospital in Montreal.
Today, Cargill is a huge company. They employ over 155,000 people worldwide. They handle 1/4 of the country's total grain exports. 20% of our beef and pork comes from their factories. 6 million tons of sugar is shipped by Cargill each year. And when you're this big making this much money, it can be easy to let things slip through the cracks.
He is a member of the hospital's tumor board in charge of chemotherapy. Also, he is dean of the American Association of Bioanalysts. In the Philippines, there is Dr. Manuel Navarro, professor of medicine and surgery at the University of Santo Tomas in Manila. He is distinguished internationally as a cancer researcher and has over 100 major scientific papers to his credit, some of which have been read before the International Cancer Congress.
In the year 2000, around 16 million pounds of sliced turkey processed by Cargill's Texas plant was recalled because it was contaminated with Listeria, a deadly bacteria. The meat caused 7 deaths, 3 stillbirths, and 29 illnesses across 10 American states. Later on that same year, a 3-year-old died from E. coli poisoning after eating beef that came from one of Cargo's processing plants. In 2009, more E. coli tainted burgers were sent out, this time causing a woman to become paralyzed from the waist down. Why does this keep happening? Because Cargo has discovered an innovative way to save money on their meat processing costs. Here's how. Instead of using expensive cuts of meat to make your burgers, you want to use all those bits of meat and intestines that fall onto your factory floor. Just scoop all that up, soak it in some ammonia to kill the bacteria, throw it into a grinder, and out comes burger patties that cost 25% less. And sure, fecal matter may end up in there every now and then, especially if you're using intestines and all that good stuff. But as long as it's treated with bleach, and the animals are fed human-grade antibiotics to reduce infection, everything should be a-okay. Just package it up and ship it out for the masses to consume.
Can't have a bunch of small players delivering such an important food source to the nation's consumers. You have to have larger companies that can do it cheaply and can keep costs down.
In Mexico, there is Dr. Ernesto Contreras, who for over a decade has operated the famous Good Samaritan Cancer Clinic in Tijuana. He is one of Mexico's most distinguished medical figures. He received postgraduate training at Harvard's Children's Hospital in Boston. He has served as professor of histology and pathology at the Mexican Army Medical School and as the chief pathologist at the Army Hospital in Mexico City. In Belgium, there is Dr. Mason of the University of Louvain. In Italy, there is Dr. Givetti of the University of Turin. In Japan, there is Dr. Sakai, a prominent physician in Tokyo. And in the United States, there are such respected names as Dr. Burke of the National Cancer Institute, Dr. Marone of the Jersey City Medical Center, Dr. Krebs, who developed Laetrile, Dr. Richardson of San Francisco, and many more from over 20 countries with equally impeccable credentials.
Which brings us to today. But you want to know what's even more sketchier than Cargill? America's tap water. If you're drinking tap water in America right now, you gotta stop. Because not only is it filled with fluoride, but it's also filled with heavy metals, chemicals, bacteria, and guess what else? You know all those drugs that Americans take like birth control that's filled with hormones? Yeah, people pee those chemicals out, it gets flushed down, that wastewater gets sent to a water treatment plant, but most of these treatment plants in America don't have the capability to filter out chemicals like that, so it gets sent straight back to your tap. That means every time you're drinking from the tap, every time you're showering, you are getting an entire cocktail of these things straight into your body.
These researchers have reported that most of their patients experience several important side effects, including an immediate lowering of blood pressure, improved appetite, an increase in the hemoglobin and red blood cell count, and above all, a release from pain without narcotics. Even if the patient has started Laetrile therapy too late to be saved, this last effect is a merciful blessing in itself. In the United States, if a doctor wishes to avoid being labeled a quack, he must practice what is called consensus medicine. In other words, he must use only those treatments that generally are also used by his colleagues. At the present time, in the field of cancer, those are limited to surgery, X-ray, and drugs. For comparison, therefore, let's turn now to the results and benefits attained through these so-called orthodox treatments. As we shall see, surgery is the least harmful of the three, and in some cases, it can be a life-saving stopgap measure. Surgery also has the psychological advantage of visibly removing the tumor, and from that point of view, it offers the patient and his family some comfort and hope. However, the degree to which surgery is useful is the same degree to which the tumor is not malignant. The greater the proportion of cancer cells in that tumor, the less likely it is that surgery will help. And the most highly malignant tumors of all generally are considered inoperable. The statistical rate of long-term survival after surgery is at best only 10 or 15%. And once the cancer has metastasized to a secondary location, surgery has almost no survival value whatsoever. The reason, of course, is that, like the other therapies approved by organized medicine, surgery removes only the tumor. It does not remove the cause. The rationale behind X-ray therapy is essentially the same as with surgery. The medical objective is to remove the tumor, but to do so by burning it away rather than cutting it out. Here also, it's primarily the non-cancer cell that's destroyed. The more malignant the tumor, the more resistant it is to radiotherapy. In fact, this procedure has all the same limitations and drawbacks of surgery, plus one more. It actually increases the likelihood that cancer will develop in other parts of the body. Yes, it's a well-established fact that excessive exposure to radioactivity is an effective way to induce cancer. This has been demonstrated not only among the survivors of Hiroshima, but a research team at the University of Buffalo recently reported that less than a dozen routine medical x-rays to the same part of the body increases the risk of leukemia by at least 60%. And these routine x-rays are nothing compared to the intense radiation used on cancer patients. X-rays induce cancer because of at least two factors. First, they do physical damage to the body, which triggers off the production of trophoblast cells as part of the healing process. Second, they weaken or destroy the production of white blood cells, which, as we have seen, constitute the immunological defense mechanism, the body's frontline defense against cancer. As with all forms of currently popular treatments, once the cancer has metastasized to a second location, there is practically no chance that the radiology patient will live. So, in addition to an almost zero survival value, radiotherapy has the extra distinction of also spreading the very cancer it's supposed to combat. The record of so-called anti-cancer drugs is even worse. Most of them currently in use are highly poisonous, not just to cancer, but to the rest of the body as well. In fact, generally they are more deadly to healthy tissue than they are to the malignant cell. Most of these drugs are described as radiomimetic, which means that they mimic or produce the same effects as radiation. Consequently, they also suppress the immunological defense mechanism, and thus help to spread the cancer to other areas. But whereas X-rays usually are directed to only one or two locations, these chemicals do their deadly work on every cell in the entire body. The use of exotic and highly toxic drugs is the latest fad in cancer therapy. As scores of these drugs are developed each year, cancer patients become the human guinea pigs upon which they're tested. The tragic results are well depicted in the following statements taken from just a few of the official chemotherapy reports of the National Cancer Institute. An effort was made to choose patients who were well enough to withstand the anticipated toxicity. Early death of 2 of the first 5 patients treated caused a reduction to 8 milligrams per kilogram per day. No significant anti-tumor benefit of any duration was observed. In this study, 6 of the 8 children died. No therapeutic effect was observed. Toxic clinical manifestations consisted of vomiting, hypertension, changes in oral mucous membranes, and diarrhea. Renal damage and cerebral edema were observed at post-mortem examination in each of the 6 patients who died while receiving this drug. The death of 2 patients was unequivocally caused by drug toxicity. 8 of the 14 patients who survived their initial courses of therapy showed rapid and general deterioration and died within 10 weeks after therapy began. And so it goes, year in and year out. Deadly experiments, fully approved by organized medicine. Experiments that can be viewed only as a form of human vivisection. This then is the comparison between vitamin therapy and orthodox treatments. The statistics that follow are taken from the National Cancer Institute, the American Cancer Society, and from the clinical records of those physicians who have used Laetrile in the treatment of their own patients. They vary widely depending on the age of the patient, the sex, the cancer location, and the degree of malignancy. Consequently, the figures shown will be averages for all kinds and all groups together. This is the story they tell. Of those with advanced metastasized cancer, who have been told by their physician that there is no hope, only 15% will be saved when they turn to vitamin therapy, which is not good. But under orthodox treatment, less than 1 out of 1,000, or 1/10 of 1%, will survive 5 years. Of those with early diagnosed cancer, at least 80% will be saved by vitamin therapy. But no more than 15% will survive under orthodox treatment. And with those who presently are healthy, with no clinical cancer to begin with, close to 100% can expect to be free from cancer as long as they routinely obtain adequate amounts of vitamin B17. But those who subsist on the typical American diet and rely only on the therapies of organized medicine are doomed to a survival rate of just 84%. And that figure includes all ages. It is much less for those above 30. As mentioned previously, these figures will vary widely depending on age, sex, cancer location, and degree of malignancy. Also, they're somewhat arbitrary when it comes to separating early diagnosed cancers from those that are advanced, for often there's a gray area between the two. Nevertheless, in general, they are as accurate as any such tabulation can be, and they tell an impressive story that cannot be brushed aside. Considering the lack of results obtained by orthodox medicine, it's been said that voodoo witchcraft would be just as effective, and perhaps even more so, for at least then the patient would be spared the deadly side effects of radiation and chemical poisoning. Just as we are amused today at the primitive medical practices of history, future generations surely will look back at our own era and cringe at the senseless cutting, burning, and poisoning that now passes for medical science. No matter how useless or even harmful current practices may be, consensus medicine demands that they be used by every physician. Regardless of how many patients are lost, the doctor's professional standing is upheld because those who pass judgment through peer review are using the same treatments and getting the same tragic results. On the other hand, if a doctor deviates from this pattern and dares to apply nutrition as the basis of his treatment, even if he attains a high degree of success, he is condemned as a quack. He may lose his hospital privileges and even is subject to arrest. There's no doubt that most of the opposition to vitamin therapy comes from well-intentioned people who simply don't yet have all the facts. But vested interest also plays an important role. As stated at the beginning of this presentation, the science of cancer therapy isn't nearly as complicated as the politics of cancer therapy. The history of how these vested interests have succeeded in influencing the medical profession, government agencies, and public opinion is a fascinating story by itself. But of course, time doesn't permit it to be told here. For the full story of both the science and the politics, read World Without Cancer. This book contains all the information presented in this film, plus a great deal more. It includes extensive extracts from primary research documents, and is amply footnoted so that the serious student can pursue his own avenues of investigation. We recommend that you obtain several copies of this book for the purpose of lending to your friends. The information contained could well save their lives. Once vitamin B17 is as widely understood and available as other vitamins, cancer then will be as rare as is scurvy or pellagra today. When nitrillicides are used perhaps as a routine seasoning to our food, like iodized table salt, then the battle finally will be won. This is our goal, and it's an objective that can be reached right now by anyone who will act upon this knowledge. You and your family now may become secure from cancer. But that's only because someone else has helped to bring these facts to your...
Meet your meat. Fast food restaurants and what you're consuming. Let's go.
You find a report that comes out, so they use the good parts of the body, what do they do with the rest? Then suddenly you find that 25% of McDonald's burger is human remains. The world's not ready for that yet. No, it's not, because most of the world eat it. Exactly right. But I'll tell you what, that'll put them out of business when that becomes public knowledge.
Do we have no food for you because we have a shutdown? Or do we give you some little quick salads that the first lady will make along with the second lady? They'll make some salads. And I said, you guys run into salads. Or do I go out, Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott, do I go out and send out for about 1,000 hamburgers, Big Macs? So actually we bought 1,000. Burger King, all American companies. Burger King, Wendy's, Counters, which is we have everything that I like that you like.
Can you do less for others? Join with us in this noble task. Together, we can create a world without cancer.
Last night I tell you to watch that thing on television, and I did. Yeah.
You know, these aren't jokes, these are thoughts, these are things that make you say,